3rd to the 11th of May. French revolutionary students seized the bull by the horns and closed down the formal bourgeois education system, occupying colleges and universities, declaring all power to the imagination. It is the prelude to a real revolutionary situation. Demonstrators, barricades, bonfires. The sparks in the breeze were political, ideological and dangerous. Paris was in the grip of the insurrectionists. Burnt out cars and charred smouldering debris littered the streets of the student quarters, while throughout the country factory gates and dock gates stayed shut, with workers occupying the plants. General strikes grabbed the state by the balls, but kept letting go. The rags announced, the university students no longer stand alone. Their pickets, weary and unshaven, bloody but unbowed, still face police today in the ravaged Boulevard Saint-Michel, but they have been joined by their teachers, by a junior but equally militant army of school children, by scores of professional organisations, by the trade unions, and finally by the two great opposition parties, the Communists and the Socialist Federation of the Left. All the opponents of the regime are today engaged in feverish political consultations to coordinate their attack. The sound of exploding petrol tanks like crashes from big guns boomed across the right bank. 50,000 students and workers were in mortal combat with the riot police in battles around the Sorbonne and the left bank. A fusillade of tear gas met the rainbow of petrol bombs across the entire continent. Workers and students asserted, power to the imagination, and better to die on your feet than live on your knees. 12th of May, students burst into Strasbourg University and hoist a red flag proclaiming the university autonomous and at the facility of the revolution. 13th of May, one-day general strike of all unions in France, supported by all leftist parties, even the Communist Party. Mass occupations of Sorbonne University in Paris. 14th of May, formal end of the one-day general strike. Mass unofficial strikes spread across France. Saudi aviation workers in Nantes lock up the management in their offices, form an action committee and occupy the plant. Next came Renault at Rouen. Then 60,000 Renault workers in the company's 6 factories seized the plants. Managers imprisoned in their offices are given escorts through jeering workers to the toilet after having to put their hands up to request a leave to go, as the workers had been forced to do. Shipyards and hospitals followed. Then Citron and the port of Le Havre and Marseille. 16th of May, 50 French workplaces under occupation and 200,000 on strike. 19th of May, 2 million on strike. 22nd of May, 10 million workers on strike, 2/3 of the entire French workforce. Time?
5 minutes in a day.
5 minutes? I've got a lap
That's
Yeah, okay. That's just fancy boss.
I'll count it down for you.
No, don't do that. Let's try this. Ireland. On another occasion we were walking down the main street in early evening when a line of pigs and jeeps bristling with armed troops travelling past us suddenly turned in a U-turn across the other side of the road, forming a semicircle and blocking both traffic and pedestrians in both directions. As the troops, guns in hand, start to jump from the vehicles, Frank suddenly shouts, "Run! Run! They'll fucking shoot us!" Frank was off down the road shouting, "Run! Run!" Over his shoulder as I set off, I heard the thud, thud of bullets hitting the walls and the sudden silence of traffic halting. There was some small machine gun fire as we swept around the corner into a bar. I was red-faced, sweating, and my knees were shaking. We both gasped for air. The barman had turned the TV down, and the customers were listening to the gunfire. The barman flicked his head and smiled. "Ours," said Frank to me as we walked to the bar. "What will you be having, me fine young gentleman? Are you just in out of the rain?" "Oh, we are," said Frank. He sat on a high bar stool, and I stood with my back to the door. What? I could tell it was an ambush. Too good to miss. When they started circling the wagons, if we hadn't run, we'd have been caught in the fire. A roadblock, aye, and searching for young internees or more suspects to stick behind the wire. The bastards, I was volunteering to all and sundry when the bar fell silent. I felt the wind on my back, and a voice shouted, "You!" I turned slightly. I noticed everyone else just carried on drinking or looking around, not speaking. There was a squad of soldiers, riot sticks, short round riot shields, about 8 of them, 2 with rifles. "You!" The NCO was shouting and pointing with his club at an old bloke in a big cloth cap who got up slowly and walked towards him. The sergeant grabbed him by the collar of his jacket and as he drew parallel and spun him around against the wall. "Spread!" he shouted. The old chap started to lean shakily against the wall. "Spread them legs!" the English voice shouted. "I'm an old man, sure, I can't spread." And with that the soldier whacked the bloke on the insides of his legs with the club. Smack, 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 side to side. "I'll spread them for you," he yelled. My belly went over. I knew I was going to dive in and fuck the consequences. Frank grabbed me by the arm with a grip like iron and stared right into my eyes with so much suppressed anger, along with a sort of look of contempt for my arrogance, that he stopped me in my tracks. After searching the old bloke, they spun him round and let him slide down the wall into the floor. The two soldiers with guns stepped into the middle of the bar and cocked their weapons with a mechanical chorus. I believed, they were going to spray the bar with bullets, but having scared everyone shitless, they walked out, leaving the door banging in the wind. Just finally, the provost. In 1969 they had started with a couple of handguns and shotguns and loads of petrol bombs and spunk. They hadn't worked out the world programme for the socialist revolution, but they hadn't needed to. They could see, eat and breathe repression, and that consciousness bred resistance, and history was relearned on the hoof. There were lots of confused politics in those early days. Certainly the language was misleading. Sinn Féin had split along political grounds, the officials tending to have the best sounding slogans and talking of Marxism and socialism, whereas the provost split had sponsored the struggle on the street, tending towards a more nationalistic outlook. They were given, unfortunately, to describing the stickies, the officials, as ultra-left, as communist extremists, trying to set up a Marxist dictatorship, although in fact they were engaged in nothing of the kind. To the kids on the street, this sort of language was meant to express their hatred for the bureaucracy and autocratic Stalinism of the officials' leadership. Unfortunately, it made it easy to misrepresent this struggle as being between genuine socialists and a bunch of Catholic nationalist bigots. The provost's armed militants tended to be mainly young working class militants from the cities, while the politicos were the old die-hard wing of Irish republicanism. It would take years for the politics of the northern working class fighters to stamp itself on the more green conservatism of the southern-dominated provosts. It was to be an ongoing struggle for a generation and more, but right now a movement was re-emerging. Its sharp end was undeniable working class, revolutionary, socialist and internationalist. It wouldn't take the world's best Marxists to detect less than perfect perspective in the early publications of the provisionals. They were not written by Marxists. In fact, even in the opening couple of years of Provost, this literary expression was to the right of the average Provo IRA volunteer or to the young supporters on the streets. Freedom struggle, an opening salvo, an illegal and much prized declaration of war announced the arrival of the provisional IRA, was a case in point. Although it was illustrated with defiant photos of armed insurgents, it talked about fighting for democratic socialism on the basis of Christian principles. It rejected atheistic Marxism, as it called it. It needed no foreign movement or philosophy. It saw itself as the embodiment of the principles of 1916 and the two wings of that movement, socialist and Christian nationalist. It betrayed, such as it was, a profound ignorance of that movement and the Marxist wing of it at least. The one represented by the leadership of James Connolly, an international revolutionary communist, thoroughly imbued with foreign doctrines and notions, if not totally atheistic. However, the people at the core of the anti-imperialist struggle, the people in the van of the risen working class Republican areas, were the provisionals, warts and all. Utter crap though the draftsmen of the early publications were, this was an emerging anti-imperialist, largely working class socialistic organisation. Such organisations are not developed in the social science laboratory, but in the fire of struggle and contradiction. Those to whom the task of writing up the early perspective of the organisation fell, or who claimed it for want of anyone better, or even for want of anyone else at all, tended to be drawn from the hard Republican fighters who had been in severe political and sometimes physical battle with their ostensible left under the official sway of the officials. It was the old green Republican view of what was meant to be. I'll leave it at that, I think.
Yeah, well, thanks so much, Dave.